Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In my reading roundup videos, I just talk about the books that I've been reading recently, and I've got quite a good stack in front of me today, so let's just dive right into it. I read Mayhem at the Orient Express by Kylie, Logan. This was a book that I heard about from Becca at Hicks Picks Books, and she just talked about it as being a fun, cozy mystery. And I liked the idea that it was about women who were in a book club. That kind of thing always kind of piques my attention. If it's a book about libraries or book clubs or books, anything like that, I'm in. So I thought I would give it a whirl. This is set in, I forget what state that it's in, but it's set on an island on Lake Erie in the States, and I liked that as well, that it was a small place. The island is small, and so the village or the town that the main characters are in is going to be small as well, and so I did enjoy that. So what we have here are three women who live close to each other, who are constantly at each other's throats about neighbor stuff. Right, so one woman's playing her music too loudly, and another woman is renovating the house that she bought because she's going to be opening a bed and breakfast. And so the other two women are complaining about how much traffic is on the road, the trucks from her renovations. They're just at each other's throats all the time, and so they're constantly up in front of the magistrate. I think it's the magistrate that they talk to. Anyways, and he's had enough of these three women, and so he gives a somewhat unorthodox solution. He tells them that they need to form a book club, that they will meet once a week, Monday nights, to discuss a book, and he hopes that in doing that, they will learn how to talk to each other instead of at each other, and that maybe they will resolve some of their issues. So I think that's a hilarious premise. They end up calling themselves the League of Literary Ladies. And what's even better is that the three of them aren't really readers. So that was also very entertaining. So the first book that they are to read for their book club is Murder on the Orient Express, which I love because that's Agatha Christie. And anyway, they discover the owner of a Chinese restaurant in town, the Orient Express. They discover him dead at his restaurant, and the three of them there's actually four. The fourth one is just a woman who wants to join the book club. So I liked that that addition to the group, because she actually does love to read and does love books. And so they end up investigating the case. There is a massive snowfall, and everybody kind of ends up at the main character. Her name is B, I think. Can't remember. Yes, B. Cartwright. They all end up at her, sort of almost snowed in at her bed and breakfast, as they are investigating and trying to find out what happened to the owner of the Chinese restaurant. And so yeah, this was just a really fun, cozy mystery. And then I read Rubbernecker by Belinda Bauer. This was a reread for me. I read it a few years ago, and I remembered really enjoying it, and I was interested in reading more from her, but I thought I would start here, reread this, and then read some more from her. So this is a book set in Wales, and it is the Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year winner. So this was from, let's see, 2013. So in Rubbernecker, we have our main character is called Patrick Fort. And Patrick Fort is a young man who is on the autism spectrum, and so of course he has some struggles. His father died when he was a child. He died kind of in front of him. They were walking to their car, and his father got hit by another vehicle. And Patrick has become obsessed with finding out where his father went, what happens when a person dies. That transition, he couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand where his father went, and so he becomes obsessed with that. And he ends up going to university. Once he graduates from high school, he joins this anatomy class because he figures if he can dissect a human body, he might be able to figure out what happens. Where does the person go when they die? And he comes to realize that the cadaver that they are dissecting in class, his group, there's a large group of students, and each small group has a cadaver to dissect, and their cadaver, he becomes convinced, has been murdered. And so then he has to try and figure out what to do about that. Who does he tell? What does he do? Meanwhile, we also get a glimpse at a coma ward at the hospital with patients that are in a coma, and we get first-hand perspective from one of the patients who is in a coma, but he is what's the word? Like he's awake and he knows what's going on around him, but he can't communicate that to anybody else. I forget what that's called. Anyway, this was some classic Belinda Bauer. It was great. I really did enjoy this. If you've never read Belinda Bauer, she is fantastic. And this one was just really, really good. And then from my personal reading challenge, these are the books that I read when I'm at chemo. I read The Twilight Tower by Harper. This is part of the Elizabeth I historical mystery series. This is the third in the series. And this one was great. This one, we get Elizabeth, who is spending an awful lot of her time with Robert Dudley. And so we get a lot of their relationship. We know from history that she was really good friends with Robert Dudley, and more than likely in love with him. But he, of course, was married to Amy, who he kept at a house out in the country. And so we have Elizabeth, who is because she's kind of in love, she's sort of neglecting her duties now as queen. She's a very young queen. She's only in her first or second year as queen, and her counselor, William Cecil, is concerned that she is dropping the ball with her responsibilities as queen because she is spending too much time with Robert. And she has a court musician who has been playing for them. He plays the lute, and one day he falls. He was playing up on a tower, falls and dies. And at first they think that it is just an accident, but some of the people that are close to Elizabeth that were part of her kind of private privy plot council that investigated murders in the first two books are convinced that there was something wrong with that. And we also get to learn more about Amy, and we know from history that she died, Amy Dudley was found dead at the bottom of her stairs in her house, and she had sent all the servants away to go attend a fair or something. So she was alone in the house, and there were questions about her death because it was, convenient for Robert that his wife died, because we know that he had ambitions. So that plays a part in this as well. And I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this series. I love the time period. I love that the author does a blend of historical fact with just a good story. So I did really enjoy this one as well. And then I read The Women of Baker Street by Michelle Birkby. This is a Mrs. Hudson and Mary Watson investigation. I didn't realize this when I took it out from the library, but this is actually the second in the series. And I love this concept of having the main characters be Mrs. Hudson and Mary Watson. And so you have, you know, Sherlock Holmes is a character in this book, and so is John Watson. But they are not the investigators, they're not the detectives in this story. It's Mrs. Watson and Mrs. Hudson. And I did really enjoy this as well. I picked this up for the Nightingale in August challenge. Because in this book, Mrs. Hudson ends up in the hospital. She has to have surgery, and so she spends about a week or so on a private ward recuperating. And the first day that she's there, when she wakes up from surgery, so of course she's still very groggy and everything, but she thinks that she sees another woman on the ward being murdered. But then she goes back to sleep, and when she wakes up again, no one else thought that there was anything amiss with this other woman dying, that there was nothing unnatural about it. And so she kind of figures, well, it was just a dream, or she didn't see, you know, she didn't see what she thought she saw. Until a few nights later, in the same bed, she wakes up in the middle of the night and sees another woman being murdered in the same bed that the first woman had been murdered in. So that's the reason why I picked this one up for Nightingale in August, because a lot of this story takes place in an actual hospital ward during Victorian times. And they do mention Florence Nightingale because at least one of the nurses on the ward is a Nightingale nurse, meaning she was trained at the Nightingale school for nurses. And so, yeah, I did quite enjoy this. I went back and I'm getting the first book from the library. We also have Mary Watson, who is investigating the disappearances of some boys who have been living on the street. She's kind of discerned a bit of a pattern of boys that have gone missing. And she wants to know what happened to them, and so both of these stories end up kind of coming together. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one as well. And then for my personal reading challenge for while I'm in chemo, I am also reading from the Hamish Macbeth series, and I read Death of a Perfect Wife by M.C. Beaton. This one, Hamish Macbeth is back in his beloved village of Lochdu, and a family, a husband and wife move in, and they kind of are renovating this house a bit. They want to open it up as a bed and breakfast. And the wife is, she's kind of described by the other villagers as the perfect wife. I mean, she's got, you know, the perfect home, and she's a perfect housekeeper, and she's a perfect cook, and she makes her husband eat right and stop smoking and all of that. And she kind of gets her nose in to all the other families in the village, and she gets the other wives, you know, working to her level. So her expectations of housekeeping, and she gets the other wives so that they're, you know, changing their husbands' diets and trying to convince them to stop smoking and all of that. And of course, Hamish Macbeth realizes that this is gonna be a bit of a problem. We get Dr. Brodie and his wife. His wife becomes friends with this woman who is called Trixie, and Dr. Brodie does not like what's happening with that. I really like Dr. Brodie and his wife as characters. Angela, I think her name is. They show up in further books, and so I'm glad we got a lot of them in this book. And then, of course, the perfect wife, Trixie herself, gets poisoned, and so Hamish needs to investigate who it was that killed her. And then I read a buddy read. This is The Lake House by Kate Morton, and I buddy read this with Carolyn from Carolyn's Reading Ramblings, and this was really fun to buddy read with her. This is the second Kate Morton that I have read, and I did quite enjoy this one. I think I would say I enjoyed this one more than the other book that I've read, which was The Forgotten Garden. This is a book with, again, dual timelines. Present day and then 1933, I believe. Yes. Also, I just need to show you these end papers because aren't they beautiful? Okay, so we have, in modern day, we have Detective Constable Sadie Sparrow. And she is a detective in London. And her most recent case was, they discovered a little girl, like 2 years old, had been abandoned in the apartment. She was there for like a week and nobody knows what happened to her mother. So they need to investigate, and it turns out that she just abandoned the little girl, that she just took off. And but Sadie wasn't happy with that, and she kind of took it further than she should have. And as a result, she was told that she needs to get away for a little while. And so she goes to visit her grandfather, who lives in Cornwall. And while she is there, she discovers, on one of her early morning runs, she discovers this abandoned house and learns that there is a mystery attached to this abandoned house. 70 years before, in 1933, 11-month-old Theo went missing on the night of their big midsummer party. So this was a big party that the family used to have annually, and this 11-month-old went missing at that party and was never found. The case was never solved, and so Sadie kind of digs into it because she's desperate for something to do in Cornwall. And so we also get to meet Alice, who is an older sister of Theo's, who is now in her 80s, and she is a famous mystery writer. Yeah, so this one was really good. It was complicated, but not too complicated. I enjoyed better how she handled the multiple timelines in this one than how she did them in the Forgotten Garden, because it was just 1933 and then present day. But then in 1933, when we were in that timeline, we would get sometimes people remembering things from when they were younger or whatever. And so that is less complicated to read than how she did the timelines in the Forgotten Garden, because in the Forgotten Garden there was actually like 4 that we were trying to follow, and it just got really complicated. So we get a lot of information about Alice's siblings and parents, and what happened in that summer, and what led up to the disappearance of her baby brother Theo. And so yeah, this one was good. I did enjoy it mostly. There was a few things that I didn't like. There was a couple times where the author gave us things from Theo's perspective, which I think is really difficult to write that for an 11-month-old. That didn't really work for me. And there was something at the end that didn't get wrapped up that I really think should have gotten wrapped up. It just kind of got left. And I would have preferred to find out, to have that wrapped up and find out what happened with that. But for the most part, I did enjoy this read. It was good. It was a good mystery. Figuring out what happened 70 years before is difficult. And so I thought the story was well told. The very ending, I also did think that there were parts of it that were just a bit too neat for being a case that's 70 years old. But overall, I did enjoy my read of The Lake House. And then I read Florence Nightingale at First Hand by Lynn McDonald. I read this for the Nightingale in August challenge as well. This is a short book about Florence Nightingale, and that the author used the information. The author is an archivist, I believe, or an editor of the collected works of Florence Nightingale, which is a 16-volume series, including much previously unpublished material, as well as her well-known books, articles, and letters. And so the author used all of that material to give us an idea of Florence Nightingale and what she thought about things. And according to the back, according to Mark Bostridge, this is the best short study of Florence Nightingale available and a welcome addition to the literature for Nightingale's centenary year. So Florence Nightingale was a woman who lived in the Victorian time period, who helped to bring nursing to a respectable level. She went out to the Crimean War and she helped with nursing out for the Crimean War. But Florence Nightingale was also a statistician, someone who really thought it was important to look at why things went wrong and how we can fix them, which is, I think, a fascinating piece of her character. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and there was just a couple of things I highlighted in here. The purpose of this book is to present Nightingale firsthand as an author, systems thinker, and pioneer public health reformer. The first chapter relates to her family background and education, along with the core principles that guided her working life: her faith, politics, understanding of social science and statistics, and working style. Chapters on her major areas of work follow: on social reform, women, war, public health, nursing, midwifery, workhouses, hospitals, and India. So yeah, it was an interesting book. All right. Oh yes, I thought this was interesting. Physician and leading statistician William Farr proposed Nightingale for membership in the London Statistical Society, later the Royal Statistical Society, in 1858. She was its first woman member. And then later, I made a note that there's a reference to Joseph Lister, because that's another book I'm going to talk about in a minute that I also read, called The Butchering Art, which is a book about Joseph Lister. When Nightingale began her work in the 1850s, germ theory was mere speculation. Louis Pasteur's breakthrough in the 1860s were not on human diseases, but those of winery stocks and silkworms. English surgeon Joseph Lister then began to speculate on the parallels between Pasteur's germs and the causes of infection in surgical wounds. In 1867, he theorized that it was not the oxygen or other gaseous constituent in the air that caused putrefaction, but minute organisms suspended in it. He could identify no specific germ at this point, but referred rather to septic or atmospheric germs and floating particles. To destroy them, he used carbolic acid, then the most powerful antiseptic known. So I thought that was really interesting, and that was in a chapter when it was talking about so much of Florence Nightingale's theories and practices as a nurse related to her understanding of miasma, that it was what was dangerous to people was from the air. That was the miasma in the air, and that's why she talked so much about having windows open and how important it was to clean things. So yeah, so this was a really interesting quick read about Florence Nightingale. And then I read the second book in the Slough House series by Mick Herron. This is Dead Lions. I really enjoy this series. It's a series about agents in MI5 in London, but it's about the agents who have screwed up somehow, and they get sent to Slough House. They can't be fired for whatever reason, and so they get sent to Slough House, where it is hoped that they will get so bored with the assignments that they are given, it's all paperwork and stuff like that, that they will resign themselves. And so this is the second in the series, called Dead Lions. And this one was a lot about the Cold War and ex-KGB agents, and yeah, it was really very entertaining. I love the characters in this series, And I love that it's a book about spies, but it's not your standard spy novel. It's because it's so much about the internal workings of MI5, politics and ambition, and you get the agents at Slough House basically against the agents, kind of the active agents at Regent's Park. And that's what I really like about this series. Again, this one was also really good because it wasn't what you were expecting it to be, and I love that. The twist at the end of what was actually happening was great. So if you've never tried the Slough House series, give it a whirl. It's really very entertaining. And then I read Dissolution by C.J. Sansom. Finally, this was my Booktube Spin book for Booktube Spin number 2. So I am really late to the game getting this one read. This is a reread for me. I've read the entire series, but I wanted to reread them again, and so yeah, I love this series so much. This is set in 1557 in England. King Henry VIII is on the throne, and our main character is Matthew Shardlake. He is a lawyer, and he works for Cromwell, and he gets sent to a monastery in Scarnsey on the Sussex coast because this is when the monasteries are starting to be dissolved, and someone had been sent to this monastery before to look into things and look into whether or not it would get dissolved, shut down, and that man was murdered. And so Matthew Shardlake gets sent to the monastery to find out what happened to him. Yeah, it's just so good. I love the way that C.J. Sansom writes. I love his writing style. I love the descriptions in this of 16th century England. I love the time period. I love the characters. It was a great mystery. I really did enjoy this one as well. And then finally, I read The Butchering Art by Lindsey Fitzharris. Joseph Lister's quest to transform the grisly world of Victorian medicine. Again, I read this for Nightingale in August challenge, and this one was really fascinating. First of all, I have to say, for a nonfiction history book, this was very readable. I really got on with Lindsey Fitzharris's writing style. It was really easy to read, and I actually got through it quite fast. And it was fascinating. It was fascinating. So it's about Joseph Lister and his desire to find out why people were dying post-surgery. They would, get infections and die. And so figuring out what it was that was killing them. It was really interesting. And I've marked a few pages to read to you. At 6'2", Liston, so he's a surgeon in London, was 8 inches taller than the average British male. He had built his reputation on brute force and speed at a time when both were crucial to the survival of the patient. Those who came to witness an operation might miss it if they looked away even for a moment. It was said of Liston by his colleagues that when he amputated, quote, the gleam of his knife was followed so instantaneously by the sound of sawing as to make the two actions appear almost simultaneous, end quote. His left arm was reportedly so strong that he could use it as a tourniquet while he wielded the knife in his right hand. This was a feat that required immense strength and dexterity, given that patients often struggled against the fear and agony of the surgeon's assault. Liston could remove a leg in less than 30 seconds, and in order to keep both hands free, he often clasped the bloody knife between his teeth while working. Liston's speed was both a gift and a curse. Once he accidentally sliced off a patient's testicle along with the leg he was amputating. His most famous and possibly apocryphal mishap involved an operation during which he worked so rapidly that he took off 3 of his assistant's fingers and, while switching blades, slashed a spectator's coat. Both the assistant and the patient died later of gangrene, and the unfortunate bystander expired on the spot from fright. It is the only surgery in history said to have had a 300% fatality rate. Crazy, right? Joseph Lister grew up in a home where his father used the microscope a lot. He was really interested in discovering what you can discover using a microscope. So he was really familiar with the microscope and convinced of its uses in medicine. Many of Lister's instructors still believed the microscope was not only superfluous to a study of surgery, but also a threat to the medical establishment itself. Even with improvements like Joseph Jackson's achromatic lens, that's Joseph Lister's father, the instrument continued to be regarded with suspicion by those within the medical community, many of whom lacked the skill and training to operate one effectively. What revelations did the microscope offer? Surely all relevant signs and symptoms could be observed with the naked eye. And could any of these microscopic discoveries actually lead to the effective treatment of patients? Unless the instrument offered clear benefits that were applicable to the practice of medicine and surgery, most concluded that there was no reason to waste time with it. All right, and so back to Lister's quest to find out why people were dying. The problem was that no one knew exactly how infectious diseases were transmitted. By the 1840s, the formulation of an effectual public health policy was hostage to a debate between the so-called contagionists and anti-contagionists. The former posited that disease was communicated from person to person or via the medium of goods being shipped in from pestilent areas of the world. Contagionists were vague about the agent by which disease was passed. Some suggested it was a chemical or even small invisible bullets. Others thought it might be transmitted via an animalcule, a catch-all term for small organisms. Contagionists maintained that the only way to prevent and control epidemic diseases was through the use of quarantines and trade restrictions. Contagianism seemed plausible when it came to diseases such as smallpox, where fluid in the pustules could easily be seen in the mode of transmission. However, it did little to explain sicknesses that arose through indirect contact like cholera or yellow fever. And then at the bottom of the page, while many medical practitioners recognized that neither of the two theories provided a comprehensive explanation for how infectious diseases spread, most hospital surgeons sided with the anti-contagionists by pointing to contaminated air in overcrowded wards as the cause of hospitalism. So the anti-contagionists were ones that believed that it was poisonous vapors or miasmas. And that, of course, was Florence Nightingale. There's a bit about the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park in 1851. Joseph Lister attended there. And so I just thought this was interesting. Some of the things that were on that were being exhibited. There was also the world's first major installation of public flushing toilets, designed by the Victorian sanitary engineer George Jennings. Some 827,280 people paid 1 penny to use the facilities during the exhibition, which gave rise to the popular euphemism, spending a penny. Which is great. My mom uses that euphemism all the time. All right. And here is a mention of Florence Nightingale. So I talked about in the Florence Nightingale book how there was a mention of Joseph Lister. Well, now in the Joseph Lister book, there's a mention of Florence Nightingale. At the time of Lister's appointment, nursing was not a calling that required skill or training, nor did it command much respect. Educated, well-to-do women didn't dare enter a profession that would expose them to the intimate workings of the male body or leave them alone and unsupervised with men. Florence Nightingale, the woman who would later revolutionize nursing, had not yet fully developed the protocols of cleanliness for which she would become celebrated. So there you go. I thought this part was interesting too, that in his studies, he looked at Louis Pasteur and the work that Louis Pasteur was doing. Lister picked up the baton. Initially, he focused on the parts of Pasteur's research that confirmed for him a view he already held, that the danger was indeed present in the air around the patient. Like Wells, Lister took away from Pasteur's work the idea that it wasn't the air as such, but its constituent of microbial life that was the source of hospital infection. In those early days, he probably thought that the contamination of the air and the infection of the wound were attributable to the invasion of a single organism. Lister could not yet conceive of the vast number of airborne germs and their varying degrees of virulence, nor did he understand that germs could be transmitted in many different ways and by many different media. And then here at the end, there was just a couple of really interesting things. When I started reading this book, my husband said, "Is that where we get Listerine from?" And I thought, well, probably. That's really interesting. And we find out here at the end. The burgeoning awareness of microbes intensified the Victorian public's preoccupation with cleanliness, and a new generation of carbolic acid cleaning and personal hygiene products flooded onto the market. Perhaps the most famous of these was Listerine, invented by Dr. Joseph Joshua Lawrence in 1879. Lawrence had attended Lister's lecture in Philadelphia, which inspired him to begin manufacturing his own antiseptic concoction in the back of an old cigar factory in St. Louis shortly thereafter. Lawrence's formula contained thymol in addition to eucalyptal and menthol. It also had an alcohol concentration of 27%. Nothing would have come of Listerine had the entrepreneurial pharmacist Jordan Wheat Lambert not recognized its potential when he met Lawrence in 1881. Lambert bought the rights to the product and its formula from the good doctor and began marketing it as an antiseptic with multiple uses, including as a dandruff treatment, a floor cleaner, and even a cure for gonorrhea. In 1895, Lambert promoted Listerine to the dental profession as an oral antiseptic, a use for which it has achieved immortality. Among the more surprising offshoots of Lister's work was the establishment of one of the most recognizable corporations in the world today. Like the inventor of Listerine, Robert Wood Johnson first became aware of antisepsis when he attended Lister's lecture at the International Medical Congress in Philadelphia. Inspired by what he had heard that day, Johnson joined forces with his two brothers, James and Edward, and founded a company to manufacture the first sterile surgical dressings and sutures mass-produced according to Lister's methods. They named it Johnson & Johnson. So yeah, the butchering art. This was really good. Whew. So there you have it. These are the books that I have been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? Let's chat about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.